The fireman's name was Pampin. The corps de ballet was flung into consternation. At first sight, this fiery head in no way corresponded with Joseph Bouquet's description of the ghost. But the young ladies soon persuaded themselves that the ghost had several heads, which he changed about as he pleased. And, of course, they at once imagined that they were in the greatest danger. Once a fireman did not hesitate to faint, leaders and front row and back row girls alike had plenty of excuses for the fright that made them quicken their pace when passing some dark corner or ill-lighted corridor. Sorelli herself, on the day after the adventure of the fireman, placed a horseshoe on the table in front of the stage doorkeeper's box, which everyone who entered the opera otherwise than as a spectator must touch before setting foot on the first tread of the staircase. This horseshoe was not invented by me, any more than any other part of this story, alas, and may still be seen on the table in the passage outside the stage doorkeeper's box, when you enter the opera through the court known as the Cour de l'Administration. To return to the evening in question. "It's the ghost," little Jams had cried. An agonizing silence now reigned in the dressing room. Nothing was heard but the hard breathing of the girls. At last, Jams, flinging herself upon the farthest corner of the wall, with every mark of real terror on her face, whispered, "Listen." Everybody seemed to hear a rustling outside the door. There was no sound of footsteps. It was like light silk sliding over the panel. Then it stopped. Sorelli tried to show more pluck than the others. She went up to the door and, in a quavering voice, asked, "Who's there?" But nobody answered. Then, feeling all eyes upon her, watching her last movement, she made an effort to show courage, and said very loudly, "Is there anyone behind the door?" "Oh, yes, yes. Of course there is," cried that little dried plum of a Meg Geary, heroically holding Sorelli back by her gauze skirt. "Whatever you do, don't open the door. Oh, Lord, don't open the door." But Sorelli, armed with a dagger that never left her, turned the key and drew back the door, while the ballet girls retreated to the inner dressing room and Meg Geary sighed. "Mother, mother." Sorelli looked into the passage bravely. It was empty. A gas flame, in its glass prison, cast a red and suspicious light into the surrounding darkness, without succeeding in dispelling it. And the dancer slammed the door again, with a deep sigh. "No," she said, "there is no one there. Still, we saw him," Jams declared, returning with timid little steps to her place beside Sorelli. "He must be somewhere prowling about. I shan't go back to dress. We had better all go down to the foyer together, at once, for the speech, and we will come up again together." And the child reverently touched the little coral finger ring which she wore as a charm against bad luck, while Sorelli, stealthily, with the tip of her pink right thumbnail, made a St. Andrew's cross on the wooden ring which adorned the fourth finger of her left hand. She said to the little ballet girls, "Come, children, pull yourselves together. I dare say no one has ever seen the ghost." "Yes, yes, we saw him. We saw him just now," cried the girls. "He had his death's head in his dress coat, just as when he appeared to Joseph Bouquet." "And Gabriel saw him too," said Jams. "Only yesterday afternoon, in broad daylight." "Gabriel, the chorus master?" "Why, yes, didn't you know? And he was wearing his dress clothes, in broad daylight?" "Who, Gabriel?" "Why, no, the ghost." "Certainly, Gabriel told me so himself. That's what he knew him by." Gabriel was in the stage manager's office. Suddenly the door opened and the Persian entered. "You know the Persian has the evil eye?" "Oh, yes," answered the little ballet girls in chorus, warding off ill luck by pointing their forefinger and little finger at the absent Persian, while their second and third fingers were bent on the palm and held down by the thumb. "And you know how superstitious Gabriel is," continued Jams. "However, he is always polite. When he meets the Persian, he just puts his hand in his pocket and touches his keys. Well, the moment the Persian appeared in the doorway, Gabriel gave one jump from his chair to the lock of the cupboard, so as to touch iron. In doing so, he tore a whole skirt of his overcoat on a nail. Hurrying to get out of the room, he banged his forehead against a hat peg and gave himself a huge bump. Then, suddenly stepping back, he skinned his arm on the screen, near the piano. He tried to lean on the piano, but the lid fell on his hands and crushed his fingers. He rushed out of the office like a madman, slipped on the staircase and came down the whole of the first flight on his back. I was just passing with Mother. We picked him up. He was covered with bruises and his face was all over blood. We were frightened out of our lives, but, all at once, he began to thank Providence that he had got off so cheaply. Then he told us what had frightened him. He had seen the ghost behind the Persian, the ghost with the death's head just like Joseph Bouquet's description. Jams had told her story ever so quickly, as though the ghost were at her heels, and was quite out of breath at the finish. A silence followed, while Sorelli polished her nails in great excitement. It was broken by little Geary, who said, "Joseph Bouquet would do better to hold his tongue." "Why should he hold his tongue?" asked somebody. "That's Mother's opinion," replied Meg, lowering her voice and looking all about her as though fearing lest other ears than those present might overhear. "And why is it your mother's opinion?" "Hush! Mother says the ghost doesn't like being talked about." "And why does your mother say so?" Because, nothing." This reticence exasperated the curiosity of the young ladies, who crowded round little Geary, begging her to explain herself. They were there, side by side, leaning forward simultaneously in one movement of entreaty and fear, communicating their terror to one another, taking a keen pleasure in feeling their blood freeze in their veins. "I swore not to tell," gasped Meg. But they left her no peace and promised to keep the secret, until Meg, burning to say all she knew, began, with her eyes fixed on the door. "Well, it's because of the private box." "What private box?" "The ghost's box." "Has the ghost a box?" "Oh, do tell us, do tell us." "Not so loud," said Meg. "It's box 5, you know, the box on the grand tier, next to the stage box, on the left." "Oh, nonsense." "I tell you it is. Mother has charge of it." "But you swear you won't say a word?" Of course. "Well, that's the ghost's box. No one has had it for over a month, except the ghost, and orders have been given at the box office that it must never be sold." "And does the ghost really come there?" "Yes." "Then somebody does come?" "Why, no. The ghost comes, but there is nobody there." The little ballet girls exchanged glances. If the ghost came to the box, he must be seen, because he wore a dress coat and a death's head. This was what they tried to make Meg understand, but she replied, "That's just it. The ghost is not seen. And he has no dress coat and no head. All that talk about his death's head and his head of fire is nonsense. There's nothing in it. You only hear him when he is in the box. Mother has never seen him, but she has heard him. Mother knows, because she gives him his program." Sorelli interfered. "Geary, child, you're getting at us." Thereupon little Geary began to cry. "I ought to have held my tongue, if Mother ever came to know. But I was quite right. Joseph Bouquet had no business to talk of things that don't concern him. It will bring him bad luck. Mother was saying so last night." There was a sound of hurried and heavy footsteps in the passage and a breathless voice cried, "Cecile! Cecile! Are you there?" "It's Mother's voice," said Jams. "What's the matter?" She opened the door. A respectable lady, built on the lines of a Pomeranian grenadier, burst into the dressing room and dropped groaning into a vacant armchair. Her eyes rolled madly in her brick dust-colored face. "How awful," she said. "How awful." What? "Joseph Bouquet." "What about him?" "Joseph Bouquet is dead." The room became filled with exclamations, with astonished outcries, with scared requests for explanations. "Yes, he was found hanging in the third-floor cellar. It's the ghost," little Geary blurted, as though in spite of herself. But she at once corrected herself, with her hands pressed to her mouth. No, I didn't say it. All around her, her panic-stricken companions repeated under their breaths, "Yes, it must be the ghost." Sorelli was very pale. "I shall never be able to recite my speech," she said. Ma Jams gave her opinion, while she emptied a glass of liqueur that happened to be standing on a table. "The ghost must have something to do with it. The truth is that no one ever knew how Joseph Bouquet met his death. The verdict at the inquest was natural suicide." In his Memoirs of Manager, M. Moncharmin, one of the joint managers who succeeded M.M. de Bienne and Poligny, describes the incident as follows. "A grievous accident spoiled the little party which M.M. de Bienne and Poligny gave to celebrate their retirement. I was in the manager's office, when Mercier, the acting manager, suddenly came darting in. He seemed half mad and told me that the body of a scene shifter had been found hanging in the third cellar under the stage, between a farmhouse and a scene from the Roi de Lahore. I shouted, 'Come and cut him down.' By the time I had rushed down the staircase and the Jacob's ladder, the man was no longer hanging from his rope. So this is an event which M. Moncharmin thinks natural. A man hangs at the end of a rope. They go to cut him down, The rope has disappeared. Oh, M. Moncharmin found a very simple explanation. Listen to him. It was just after the ballet, and leaders and dancing girls lost no time in taking their precautions against the evil eye. There you are. Picture the corps de ballet scuttling down the Jacob's ladder and dividing the suicide's rope among themselves in less time than it takes to write. When, on the other hand, I think of the exact spot where the body was discovered, the third cellar underneath the stage, imagine that somebody must have been interested in seeing that the rope disappeared after it had effected its purpose, and time will show if I am wrong. The horrid news soon spread all over the opera, where Joseph Bouquet was very popular. The dressing rooms emptied and the ballet girls, crowding around Sorelli like timid sheep around their shepherdess, made for the foyer through the ill-lit passages and staircases, trotting as fast as their little pink legs could carry them. 1. I have the anecdote, which is quite authentic, from M. Pedro Gaillard himself, the late manager of the opera. Chapter 2. The New Margarita. On the first landing, Sorelli ran against the Comte de Chagny, who was coming upstairs. The Count, who was generally so calm, seemed greatly excited. I was just going to you, he said, taking off his hat. Oh, Sorelli, what an evening! And Christine Daaé, what a triumph! Impossible, said Meg Geary. 6 months ago, she used to sing like a crock. But do let us get by, my dear Count, continues the brat, with a saucy curtsy. We are going to inquire after a poor man who was found hanging by the neck. Just then the acting manager came fussing past and stopped when he heard this remark. What? He exclaimed roughly. Have you girls heard already? Well, please forget about it for tonight, and above all don't let M. de Bienne and M. Poligny hear. It would upset them too much on their last day. They all went on to the foyer of the ballet, which was already full of people. The Comte de Chagny was right. No gala performance ever equaled this one. All the great composers of the day had conducted their own works in turns. Fauré and Krauss had sung, and, on that evening, Christine Daaé had revealed her true self, for the first time, to the astonished and enthusiastic audience. Gounod had conducted the funeral march of a marionette, Rea, his beautiful overture to Sigua, Saint-Saëns, the Danse Macabre and a Reverie Orientale, Massenet, an unpublished Hungarian march, Guiraud, his Carnival, Delibes, the Valse Lente from Sylvia and the Pizzicati from Capella. Mier. Krauss had sung the Bolero in the Vespri Siciliani, and Mier. Denise Bloch the drinking song in Lucrezia Borgia. But the real triumph was reserved for Christine Daaé, who had begun by singing a few passages from Romeo and Juliet. It was the first time that the young artist sang in this work of Gounod, which had not been transferred to the opera and which was revived at the Opera Comique after it had been produced at the Old Theatre Lyrique by Mme. Carvalho. Those who heard her say that her voice, in these passages, was seraphic, but this was nothing to the superhuman notes that she gave forth in the prison scene and the final trio in Faust, which she sang in the place of La Carlotta, who was ill. No one had ever heard or seen anything like it. Daaé revealed a new Margarita that night, a Margarita of a splendor, a radiance hitherto unsuspected. The whole house went mad, rising to its feet, shouting, cheering, clapping, while Christine sobbed and fainted in the arms of her fellow singers and had to be carried to her dressing room. A few subscribers, however, protested. Why had so great a treasure been kept from them all that time? Till then, Christine Daaé had played a good Siebel to Carlotta's rather too splendidly material Margarita, and it had needed Carlotta's incomprehensible and inexcusable absence from this gala night for the little Daaé, at a moment's warning, to show all that she could do in a part of the program reserved for the Spanish diva. Well, what the subscribers wanted to know was, why had de Bienne and Poligny applied to Daaé when Carlotta was taken ill? Did they know of her hidden genius? And, if they knew of it, why had they kept it hidden? And why had she kept it hidden? Oddly enough, she was not known to have a professor of singing at that moment. She had often said she meant to practice alone for the future. The whole thing was a mystery. The Comte de Chagny, standing up in his box, listened to all this frenzy and took part in it by loudly applauding. Philippe Georges-Marie Comte de Chagny was just 41 years of age. He was a great aristocrat and a good-looking man, above middle height and with attractive features, in spite of his hard forehead and his rather cold eyes. He was exquisitely polite to the women and a little haughty to the men, who did not always forgive him for his successes in society. He had an excellent heart and an irreproachable conscience. On the death of old Count Philibert, he became the head of one of the oldest and most distinguished families in France, whose arms dated back to the 14th century. The Chagneys owned a great deal of property, and, when the old count, who was a widower, died, it was no easy task for Philippe to accept the management of so large an estate. His two sisters and his brother, Raoul, would not hear of a division and waived their claim to their shares, leaving themselves entirely in Philippe's hands, as though the right of primogeniture had never ceased to exist. When the two sisters married, on the same day, they received their portion from their brother, not as a thing rightfully belonging to them, but as a dowry for which they thanked him. The Comtesse de Chagny, née de Montroger de la Martinière, had died in giving birth to Raoul, who was born 20 years after his elder brother. At the time of the old count's death, Raoul was 12 years of age. Philippe busied himself actively with the youngster's education. He was admirably assisted in this work first by his sisters and afterward by an old aunt, the widow of a naval officer, who lived at Brest and gave young Raoul a taste for the sea. The lad entered the border training ship, finished his course with honors and quietly made his trip round the world. Thanks to powerful influence, he had just been appointed a member of the official expedition on board the Requin, which was to be sent to the Arctic Circle in search of the survivors of the D'Artois expedition, of whom nothing had been heard for 3 years. Meanwhile, he was enjoying a long furlough which would not be over for 6 months, and already the dowagers of the Faubourg Saint-Germain were pitying the handsome and apparently delicate stripling for the hard work in store for him.